So welcome everybody, and my name is Ivor Blumenthal, and it's an absolute pleasure to be bringing you the very first in this year's enrichment series. And we are covering today BBBEE, which is broad-based Black economic empowerment. And again, I want to emphasize the fact that it is broad-based Black economic empowerment. That's what BBBEE stands for. It's not BEE, Black Economic Empowerment. BEE relates more to empowerment deals, which are done on an offhand basis, whereas broad-based Black economic empowerment implies a complete integration of inclusion in the workplace, and within the workplace, obviously, into the wider community. Can I please ask you to mute your microphones, and that if it's necessary, you can unmute them if you want to ask a question or make a statement. Good. So my name is Ivor Blumenthal, and it's my absolute pleasure to be presenting this workshop for you. So let's start. Broad-based Black economic empowerment, which was introduced before 2000, it was negotiated by 2000 between all of the post-1994 activists in South Africa, and the very first scorecard for broad-based Black economic empowerment was promulgated in 2003, which means that BBBEE for the workplace kicked off in 2003, and every 10 years, it goes through a different kind of iteration or a new kind of scorecard. So for example, 2003 was the first scorecard. The second scorecard was then introduced in 2013 with dramatic changes, I might add, but we're not going to talk about them today. And then by 2020, we had already the unofficial version of the third scorecard, although it's expected that that'll be finalized by 2023. So we currently are operating under the revised second scorecard, which was promulgated in 2013, just to give you some of that boring history. So the scorecard is the mechanism for measuring a company against targets. That's what the scorecard is. The first set of targets we've had in South Africa are referred to as generic targets. In other words, they targets across all industries and all sectors for all sizes of companies. But there have been additional targets which have been introduced on a sectoral basis, for example, the construction sector or the media, advertising, communication sector, the mining sector, which have taken those targets and in the process of taking those targets have in fact customized them for different industries. But today we are primarily going to talk about generic scorecards and generic targets. Not specific to any particular industry. So in 2003, the first scorecard that was implemented for broad-based Black economic empowerment measured a company against 7 elements. So as you can see, those elements were ownership, management and control, employment equity, skills development, preferential procurement, enterprise and supplier development, and then finally socioeconomic development. Ownership is really who owns the company, and the target that has been set throughout is that a minimum for ownership points to be obtained by a company, the company will have to show that at a minimum of 26% of shareholding in the business is owned by Black beneficiaries, not necessarily owned by individuals, but results in an economic benefit to Black beneficiaries, 26%. Management and control, that element basically implies that 50% of managers at all levels in a company need to be Black, and we're going to talk about Black in a little while. And of those Black managers, 40% of them should be women. And a percentage of them should also be disabled, or 2% to be specific. Employment equity talks about the company having a scorecard, a set of scorecard points that it can achieve if The people who are employed generally in the business reflect what is referred to as the EAP demographic, which is the economically active population demographic. Skills development refers to all of 7 categories of skills training, skills development, skills planning to develop, both for existing employees in the company, we call those 18.1 employees, as well as for prospective future employees in the company, we call those 18.2 employees. That's skills development. Preferential procurement is where the requirement is that in the supply chain of your business, who you buy your toilet paper from to who you buy your raw materials from to make your paint, preferential procurement implies that 80% of those suppliers should themselves have been measured against BBBEE scorecard. Therefore, we call them a measured entity. And the regulation says that if you want to earn points for preferential procurement, then 80% of the suppliers have to be measured entities. Enterprise and supplier development said that if a company was investing 3% of net profit after tax in the development of Black suppliers into your supply chain and giving those companies contracts to supply you on a regular basis, you would get points for that, scorecard points for that. Socioeconomic development, well, that's a little crazy because essentially you've got to be the lotto. Socioeconomic development says you've got to take 1% of net profit after tax and you've got to throw it into society generally to create economic opportunities for people to earn or for people to be developed so that they can enter the workplace. So school programs, economic upliftment programs for communities and townships, etc., those qualify as socioeconomic development. Giving money to CHOC, Children Against Cancer, as long as the beneficiaries were Black, those would qualify as socioeconomic programs. So that was the original scorecard, which was promulgated in 2003. By 2013, that original scorecard was combined and was rejigged into 5 elements. So from 7 elements in 2003, the scorecard by 2013 was cut down into 5 elements, where 2 of those original 7 elements were combined with the now existing 5 elements. So for example, employment equity was combined with management control, and preferential procurement, or rather enterprise supplier and development, was combined with preferential procurement. So now we have 5 elements. We have ownership, we have management and control, which includes employment equity. We have skills development as the 3rd element. We have preferential procurement, which includes enterprise and supplier development. And then we have socio-economic development in the scorecard. Now, it's very important that you start to understand how one works with a scorecard. So here's the scorecard, the old scorecard and the new scorecard. I'm going to show it to you side by side. The old scorecard had a total of 107 points that you could earn, which included bonus points. So you'll see 20 plus 3. The 3 are bonus points. So 107 points that you could earn, which included bonus points from those 7 elements. And the targets, as you can see for the old scorecard, well, it was 26% for ownership. That hasn't changed. It was 50% for management control. That hasn't changed. It was 80% for employment equity. It was, which is included. You have to meet your employment equity demographic, but that's now included in management control and employment equity. It was, at that time, it was 3% for skills development under the old scorecard, but you can see that it has now jumped to 6% for skills development. It's jumped to 6% of skills development. In fact, it's now subsequently jumped to 6.3% of payroll that you have to spend to qualify for those 25 points under skills development, whereas previously you had to spend 3% of payroll to qualify for 5 points. So there are 10 additional points, but is now 6.3% and not 3% that has to be spent on skills development. And then as you can see, preferential procurement, which includes supplier development. Now, because those two have been combined into procurement, enterprise, and supplier development, you can earn a total of 45 points in total. So it's by far, procurement is by far the largest earning element, although skills development is by far the largest spending element on the current skill scorecard. And you'll see there that you have to spend 3% of net profit after tax on developing new suppliers into your database of suppliers. And it's 80% of the people or the companies you procure from in your supply chain have to be what we refer to as measured entities. And then again, nothing has changed with the definition of socioeconomic development, because there you'll see you still spend 1% of net profit after tax on socioeconomic development, and you earn a maximum of 5 points. So the point tally has gone up from 107 points under the 2003 scorecard to now 119 possible points, including the bonus points under the current scorecard. Any questions about the scorecard before I carry on? Okay, so no questions about the scorecard. So let's then carry on. Okay. Now, this is absolutely critically important for you. I know I keep saying everything is important, but this is most probably the most important part of the discussion. So a company becomes BBBEE verified and therefore regarded as a measured entity if it satisfies anything from a minimum of level 8 requirements, which under the new scorecard means you've got to get between 40 and 55 points. So just going back here, 40 and 55 of those 119 points over there is what will get you those 40 to 55 points. A level 7, you're doing a little better. You're getting between 55 and 70 points. A level 6, you're getting between 70 and 75. A level 5, you're getting between 75 and 80. And now we come to the critically important level. It's the level 4. Level 4 is significant in so many respects in BBBEE, broad-based Black economic empowerment. Under the generic scorecard, level 4 is important, although there are some sector scorecards, for example, construction, where they've basically shifted what is level 4 here to level 5. They've made it more difficult to get to a level 4. So level 4, you have to earn generally under the general scorecard, you have to earn between 80 and 90 points. But the importance of level 4 is that if you earn those 80 to 90 points, then you'll look under the final column there. If you're a level 4 organization that is supplying a product or a service to another company, for every rand that that other company spends with you, because you're in their supply chain, you will be able to give them 100% recognition for their spend with you. You'll notice down here, that if you're a level 8, for every rand that company spends for you, you'll only be able to give them 10 cents recognition of their spend. So level 4 says that it's the minimum level a company should expect you to be if you're their supplier, because you get 100% recognition for what you spend with them. And where this recognition spend becomes critically important is here. Where that recognition spend becomes critically important is over here. You'll see there that the target for procurement is 80%. The target for procurement is 80% spend, which means that you have to try and get 100% recognition from 80% of your measured suppliers to earn the maximum of points available over here, which, by the way, would be 40 minus 15, which is 25. You get 25 points here out of those 40 points. If you have 80% of what you buy is from measured entities, in other words, themselves BBBEE recognized, and those measured entities are measured at a level 4. If those measured entities are measured at a level 8, you're not going to get 80% of your procurement budget recognized. You're only going to get 10% of that procurement budget recognized. However, so I sometimes use the example, imagine you've got to buy toilet paper from your mother-in-law. You've got no choice. And your mother-in-law is not black. Your mother-in-law is not a measured entity. You're going to get zero recognition for the amount of money you spend on toilet paper. So what you have to do strategically is you have to look in your supply chain for as many of these level 1, 2, and 3 companies as you can possibly find who will give you recognition to compensate for the fact that you're not getting recognition for what you spend on toilet paper. So you need to find as many of those companies that are going to earn you more points than you're actually spending with them, so that you can compensate for the companies down here where you're not earning any recognition points from that company. Any questions about this? Because I know it can be confusing. Please unmute your microphone if you've got a question. Only too happy to take them. All right, moving on. So I spoke earlier where I explained that we're going to talk about the general charter now, but there are also sectoral charters. Wherever there is a sectoral organization, for example, a bargaining council in a particular industry, or very strong employer association, or very strong trade unions, and especially where there are what we call social partnerships between the trade unions and the employer organizations, you will invariably see a sectoral charter created. And the Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition will sign off and say that that sectoral charter, if it's been properly constructed, can replace the general scorecard, which ordinarily we've been talking about here. A sector charter council approved by the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition has the power to vary, to change every broad-based Black economic empowerment scorecard element. So every one of those 5 elements can be changed by the Sectoral Charter Council. It also has the power to introduce additional elements. So a practical example would be the construction Charter Council that said 26% Black ownership is not good enough for us. So within the construction sector, we want to see a minimum eventually of at least 45% Black ownership. At the moment, it's sitting on 35%. But they've already moved it from 26% to 35% Black ownership, because they're saying there are more than enough Black owners of businesses in the construction company, in the construction sector of industries, that are capable and able to compete sufficiently for us not to have to fall back on only needing to do businesses with companies that had 26% Black interest. So they changed the first element, which is ownership. The MAC Charter, the Media and Communication Charter, they looked at all the 5 elements and they introduced a 6th element. They added to the number of elements. They said, not only do we want advertising and media to be accountable to the 5 existing elements under the general scorecard, but we want to introduce a 6th element, which is called responsible marketing. We want to reward those companies that give free advertising, free marketing, free space in newspapers and magazines. We want to reward them if they're giving that free time and space to don't drink and drive, don't take drugs, don't commit gender-based violence. In other words, social causes. So the MAC Charter Council introduced responsible marketing as a 6th element over and above the 5 pre-existing elements. So that's what a sectoral charter would be. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you do need to understand what I refer to as the affected loop. In the public sector, anyone who supplies government or any state-owned entity or is in a direct line of relationship to any one of those suppliers has to have a BBBEE measured status. So if you supply a company with a service or a product, and that company tenders to local, provincial, or national government, you yourself are required to be a BBBEE measured entity. And in fact, if you have a product that is specified in a tender and you are not a measured entity, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition are now introducing a certification scheme where you will not be certified if you're not a measured entity at a particular BBBEE level. You will not be certified, and therefore your product will not be allowed to be designated for tenders, and you will not be allowed to be a supplier within a tendering supply chain. So you do need to understand that about the public sector. But who else is affected? Any recipient of funding from government. In other words, anyone who wants to benefit from a public-private partnership, any company wanting to purchase state-owned assets, a business recipient of government grants has to be a measured entity. You will have seen the hoo-ha during the lockdown around small business grants, or the small business COVID grant system and the tourism grant system that was released with hundreds of millions, if not billions of rands available, but only if companies applying were they themselves measured entities. So you couldn't apply for funding in the case of a lockdown to keep your business going unless you were a BBBEE measured entity. You were dependent on government grants. And in fact, that case went to court, if you remember, where the court said, yes, if you do not have BBBEE measured status, measured entity status, you will not be entitled to government grants because it's in the regulations. Regulated industries and concession holders, a company seeking a license or concession from government, banks, mines, petrochemical companies, telecommunication, gambling companies, import-export companies. If you need a license or a concession from local, provincial, or national government, if you need a trading license, then by law, if you're a restaurant that is licensed to sell alcohol, you're supposed to be a BBBEE measured entity. The majority are not, but it's in the regulations. A social license, a company on the national BBBEE database, in other words, the database that the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition keeps for suppliers, all those companies have to be measured entities. A company needing a BBBEE label for consumer products, services, or retailers. So if you need to label to show your if a label, for example, for paint requires a BBBEE signet, and you're not a measured entity, you can't display that label. A company trading on its credibility and compliance credentials with its client base. So this really is what I call the affected or closed loop of why BBBEE is actually required by every business for every purpose. All right, I'm going to stop sharing just for the moment, and I want to go back to you, and I want to ask you as a group. Johan, I see your microphone is off. Do you want to ask a question? Is there anybody who wants to ask a question about anything I've said so far? Okay.
No, I've got the picture. Thanks.
Oh, Aggie, I didn't realize you were there. Hello, Aggie.
Hello.
Okay, so we're moving on now. All right, so now we are talking, ladies and gentlemen, about categories of business, What you need to understand is that BBBEE divides a business into one of three categories. It says you're either an exempt micro enterprise, which means you're earning less than, or you're doing 10 million Rand or less a year turnover, or you're a qualified small enterprise, which means you're doing between 10 and 50 million Rand a year in turnover, or you're a large enterprise, which means you're a generic enterprise. That's referred to as generic enterprise, where you're doing more than 50 million Rand a year. Now, those 5 elements of the scorecard relate to you differently. The best place to be is if you're a white-owned business with no black ownership. The only place to be is where you're earning less than 10 million Rand a year in turnover in your business, where you ordinarily under the general scorecard, because you're doing less than 10 million Rand a year, will automatically be qualified as a level 4 entity, and therefore where you're automatically capable of earning 100% of the expenditure that your clients spend with you. You're automatically capable of giving them recognition for that 100% expenditure. That can only be done if you're a white-owned entity which is doing less than 10 million Rand a year turnover, and you do it, the way you become measured is by affidavit and self-declaration. Here is a certificate from my accountant and auditor to show you I'm doing less than 10 million Rand a year turnover. And therefore, on that basis, because I'm doing less than 10 million Rand a year turnover, I'm automatically a level 4. And therefore, I can give my clients 100% recognition for every Rand they spend with me. They will get 100%. They will get a Rand recognition from me as a measured entity. The problem you've got, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you fall under the construction sector scorecard, even if you're a white-owned entity doing less than 10 million Rand a year, you are classified as a level 5 and not as a level 4. So as a white-owned entity with no black ownership, you will only ever be able to give your clients 80% recognition for every 100 Rand they spend with you. So 80 Rand out of every 100 Rand. So you will automatically lose your clients 20 cents in every Rand just because you're a white-owned business. Critically important that you understand that. So as an exempt micro enterprise, the 5 elements of BBBEE won't apply to you. But if you're doing more than 10 million Rand and less than 50 million Rand, you're a qualified small enterprise, then very definitely the 5 elements start applying to you. Ownership being the most important, where if you drop below your target on ownership, you immediately will lose a BBBEE level after you've been verified. And then a choice between either skills development or procurement. If you drop below 40% of that target, you can also then lose a BBBEE level. So you'll be a higher BBBEE level than you want to be. Large enterprises do more than 50 million Rand a year turnover. And for large enterprises, you have to meet all 5 elements, and you have to meet a minimum of 40% on ownership, a minimum of 40% on skills development, and a minimum of 40% on procurement. You don't have a choice. So just to summarize what I've just said, exempted micro enterprises, if white-owned, are automatically scored as a level 4, unless you're included in the construction sector, in which case it's a level 5. Exempted micro enterprises, if they're 51% black-owned, exempted micro enterprises, if they're 51% black-owned, are automatically scored as a level 2. And exempted micro enterprises, if they're 100% black-owned, are automatically scored as a level 1. They do not have to go through measurement against the 5 or against the remaining 4 elements of the scorecard. They're only measured against ownership. So that's the other side of the exempt micro enterprise coin. That if that exempt micro enterprise is 51% black owned, they will automatically be a level 2. And if they're 100% black owned, they'll automatically be a level 1. They do not have to be measured against the other 4 elements, which are management control, skills development, procurement, and social economic development. Qualifying small enterprises, on the other hand, if they're white owned, they need to comply and be measured against all 5 elements. If they're 51% black owned, in other words, a company doing between 10 and 50 million Rand turnover, but they are 51% black owned, again, they will automatically receive a level 2 rating. And if they then decide to be measured against the other 4 elements of the 5 elements and they're successful, they can jump from a level 2 to a level 1. So a 51% black owned company doing between 10 and 50 million rand would be a level 2 automatically, but can jump from a level 2 to a level 1 if they chase the other 4 elements and earn scorecard points on management control, skills development, procurement, and social economic development. Again, qualifying small enterprises doing between 10 and 50 million rand a year turnover, if they're 100% black owned, just automatically become level 1. They don't have to do anything else in terms of the other 4 elements of BBBEE. They cannot do better than level 1. I did mention a little earlier, in a large business, you have to achieve 40% of the ownership target, 40% of your skills development target, and that's in the points that you earn. And then 40% in terms of enterprise development, supplier development, and procurement. I just want to remind you that enterprise and supplier development, ladies and gentlemen, are those activities designed to introduce black suppliers and service providers into the supply chain of your business, where you commit in contract form to giving them business for a period of time. If a company, a large company in this instance, doesn't meet these 40% minimums, then that company gets, in fact, it's upgraded, it's downgraded, but they move a level higher. They lose a level of BBBEE recognition if they fail on any of these points, not combination of them. So it's not if they fail on 1, 2, and 3. It's if they fail on 1 or 2 or 3. They will lose a level, a BBBEE level. If a qualifying small enterprise achieves a score ordinarily but fails to meet its minimum requirements, and here, those minimum requirements are basically 2 minimums. Ownership is a non-negotiable for a qualified small enterprise. In other words, 40% of your target on ownership, or 40% of 26% black ownership, is a non-negotiable for a qualifying small business. But then you can choose between skills development or procurement, which is a combination of A, B, and C here. So you can choose. So I encourage my qualifying small enterprises to basically measure themselves in year 1 against skills development, and then year 2 against procurement, and then to rotate every year between skills development and procurement. So they don't have to choose, it's automatically on rotation. It leads to a good discipline. If they don't meet these 40% minimums, they will be downgraded. Again, any questions you guys want to ask before I move on? Okay, no questions. Moving on. So, as I mentioned, these are the key elements, the key considerations that we are now going to be dealing with. Those 5 elements are ownership, management control and employment equity as the second element, skills development, procurement, enterprise and supplier development as the 4th element, and socio-economic development. So let's talk about ownership. I need to say this, that unless you are a qualified small business and you have an opportunity to sell 51% of the ordinary shares in the business, in other words, controlling a share in the business for 51%, then you need your head read. Then you have been badly advised if you target anything more than 26% of the ordinary shares of your business being sold to black interests. And we'll talk about what that means in a little while. In other words, you do not need to sacrifice or sell more than 26% of your dividend that you're able to produce in your business, unless you're able to move because of a sale of 51% or more from a level to wherever you are to a level 2 or a level 1. So I always say to a company, if you've sold more than 26%, where you're still going to need to be measured against the other elements, then you've basically discounted your company by 74%. You've reduced the actual value of your business by 74% if you've given away anything more than 26%. And I know that's a contentious concept, but the reality is this. You do not, unless you're in the construction sector, in which case you're subject to the sectoral scorecard, where it's not 26% you're targeting, it's 35% and eventually 45%. So this is a contentious thing I've just said. If there are any questions, just please feel free to ask those questions. So if you need to achieve ownership of 26%, your options are, well, your options in terms of ownership are either a 51% equity partner, because it'll get you to a level 2, or a 26% equity deal on your ordinary shares, which ordinarily would be either I've got one individual I'm going to sell that 26% to, or I'm going to take that 26% and put it into an employee trust for my black beneficiary employees, or I'm going to put it into a black beneficiary trust. And now what that means is no employee will actually own those shares, but collectively the beneficiaries of that trust, the employees who've been identified as the beneficiaries, will benefit from the economic disbursement of the dividend. When they leave, they own nothing in the business. But while they're there, they collectively will get 26% of whatever dividend is paid. The principal focus in why ownership is so important in BBBEE is not so much on who owns the shares, but it's on the derived economic benefit, the economic benefit that's derived. And this is critically important, ladies and gentlemen, because share ownership is one thing. I suppose it's about ego, but economic benefit is more important. And I can't tell you the number of companies I come across because I'm involved in verification. I can't tell you the number of companies I come across when we're measuring companies, where those companies are so proud of the fact that they've got a 26% black partnership with their employees or with a particular individual. But since they've created that empowerment deal, not a single cent of dividend has flowed to those beneficiaries. The principle is that even if you don't declare a net profit from which you can draw a dividend in 1 year, over a 3 or a 5 year period now, you must have an average of a net profit that must be paid out as an economic benefit to those 26% shareholder beneficiaries, or the beneficiaries of the 26% shareholding, which sits in the trust. So that's ownership. Any questions about ownership before we move further? I want to emphasize about ownership these things. You want to be careful that you don't walk on the wrong side of an accusation of fronting. So you want to create that 26% equity deal in such a way that it's legal, that it makes sense, that it can be tested, and that it will eventually create a dividend which will create economic benefit for the beneficiaries. There must also be proper capacitation. It's all very well creating a trust in your business for your black employees, and you can say those black employees who've been with me for 10 years or longer, who don't have disciplinary warnings on file, will be the beneficiaries in a particular year. That's fantastic. But if those beneficiaries themselves do not understand, well, number one, are not aware of the fact that they are beneficiaries of this trust, do not understand what it means to be a beneficiary, in other words, that they haven't been properly capacitated, then it's a waste of time. Because if the verification agents ask a beneficiary, do you know about this trust? Do you know what it means to be a beneficiary? Have you seen an economic benefit or a dividend? And they look at you and say, no one's ever spoken to me. That's fronting. And the company will not only be measured, not only not be measured, but more importantly, the verification agent is obliged to report that company to the BBBEE commissioner, who will then put that company on a long list of companies to be investigated for fronting. And there is now a jail term for fronting. Any questions before I carry on about ownership? Any guilty minds who just want clarification for a friend? Nothing. All right, moving on. So now we come to the second element, and that's the element of management control. Now, if you remember, I told you the difference between the 2003 and the 2013 scorecard is that in 2003, management control was a distinct element from employment equity. But now employment equity has been combined with management control. And so we first have to look at whether or not the demographic of your business, in other words, the people who work in your business, represent or are in line with what we call the economically active population of South Africa, either on a national basis or on a provincial basis. If on a national basis, then we compare your company, to the national economically active population demographic. However, if on a provincial basis, we compare you to the provincial economically active population. And what that means is that the target, for example, for male Indians might be completely different in KwaZulu-Natal to how it is on a national demographic spreadsheet. And so we have to decide, are you going to be measured on a provincial basis or on a national basis in terms of who you employ generally, but also very, very important in terms of who your managers are. Now we come to the target for management control, because in management control, 50% of your managers should be Black at all management levels, including director level in your business, for you to earn maximum management control points. 40% of those Black managers must be women for you to earn maximum management control points. So it's not just about your team leader, your team leadership numbers in your company, or your supervisory numbers in your company, or even your first line managers in your company, because generally we find that it's not difficult for you to achieve 50% Black managers at these three levels in your business. Black being Black, Indian, colored, or Chinese people naturalized before 1994. Black being Black, Indian, colored, or Chinese people naturalized before 1994. The majority of companies depend on a Black management team at team leader, supervisor, first line manager level in South Africa. That's not an issue. The 40% females becomes more of an issue, and so points get lost along the way there. But where it comes to senior strategic management level and director level of management in your business, the majority of companies fall short and fail of showing that half of the numbers at the senior level or the director level are Black people, and that of those, about half of those are females. And I'm generalizing because there are some exceptional companies. And if you meet these targets, these are points for jam, quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen. However, this generally is the problem, that up to first line manager, companies generally don't have a problem meeting those targets, but from senior strategic and director level, huge problems in meeting those targets. And that's why we introduce management development incubation training programs, which we can talk about a little later. The point I want to make to you is, in preparing this, just look at your organogram and be logical. The expectation from a national policy perspective, from a political perspective, from a social perspective in South Africa after 1994 is that your workplaces will become more democratically reflective of the demographics in the economically active population. So don't be stupid. Don't think that you can keep your entire cohort of managers across these levels white when the economically active population says that you're out of touch with who make up the demographics of the country as a whole or the province that you're operating your business in. Be logical. I like to say to companies that I work with, look, for example, at your team leaders. All right, so look, for example, at your drivers. You got 5 drivers in your company. Are you telling me, and those drivers are all going to be Black, Indian, or colored. Are you telling me that there isn't one of those drivers who could be considered to be more senior than the other four? Are you telling me that when you hand out the schedules in the morning, you don't go to that one guy and give him the schedules and say, now make sure that everybody else knows the deliveries and the collections that they're responsible for today? So even if he's not called a team leader, paid as a team leader, you treat him as a team leader. And the point I want to make to you is the beauty about management control and being measured against management control is you're only assessed at the time of measurement. So you have between now and when you finally go for a verification assessment, you have a long time to actually adjust these things and to implement a contract that appoints that fifth driver as a team leader to make sure he's being paid. Now, if he's been there for longer than most guys, he's most probably going to be paid more than the other guys anyway. So it might not even cost you anything to do that. But the moment you do that, we know we've got another black team leader in place who's actually a team leader. He's doing the job of a team leader. And you should be able to do similarly at the supervisory level. 9 times out of 10, even at the first line manager level. The difficulty is obviously always becoming the senior level and the director level. But look at your organogram. Be logical. You're already doing 9/10 of the PT. You just haven't formalized it, which means you've got a very poor human resource person or a personnel officer in place in your business, or you don't have an HR person in your business. But you can plug these gaps very quickly. These are not difficult things to do so that you earn points. You're already doing them 9 times out of 10. Where you genuinely don't have people in your business that you can appoint into these positions under management control to try and come close to 50% and 40% on each of these levels, wherever these levels apply in your business. Not all companies have all of these levels. Some companies only have team leader, supervisor, and senior manager. All right, so you don't have to measure against all of these levels, but whichever levels of management apply are the ones that you're going to measure against. But where you genuinely don't have people of color and females of color who can be put into these positions, then you're entitled to implement a management training program over 1 or 2 or 3 years. And in the process that those trainees, as long as they're given management responsibilities, which might include staff responsibilities and policy management responsibilities, they will count towards your management control demographic in your business. And that's why I've said to associations, employer associations, offer management incubators, which are not necessarily training programs. Offer management incubators for your members so that they can sign up and have management trainees at these various levels without necessarily initially having to appoint them on a full-time basis. So that's management control. Any questions about management control before we move on to the third element of the 5, which is skills development? Aggie, are you all right?
I'm fine, Ivor. I'm 100% on this. Thank you.
Tara, are you all right? Are you starting to see how SAPMA can play a role in offering shared services?
Yes, I'm understanding. Thanks, Ivor.
Okay, good. All right, so moving on then. So now we come to the third element and the most expensive element of broad-based Black economic empowerment. And that's the element of skills development. Now, the principle of introducing skills development into the BBBEE scorecard is because of the recognition that we will always have this never-ending circle of saying, well, we can't employ Black people because there are no competent Black people out there. And that's very often used as an excuse because, first of all, that's not true. There are many competent, economically active Black people out in the marketplace who are unemployed. And there are many people within our company who've been there for 10 or 20 years who can be trained and be promoted to higher levels and more senior levels that are just being overlooked. So skills development is very much a central tenet of broad-based Black economic empowerment. It is the tenet upon which the entire workplace skills plan reporting process is built and the employment equity reporting plan process is built. And both of those are a prerequisite of becoming measured for BBBEE purposes. You have to have completed your skills development report, and you have to have completed your employment equity report for you to qualify to be a measured entity, BBBEE measured entity. But it's the most expensive element because you have to spend 6.3% of payroll. So if anyone says, what's the skills levy? It's not 1%. 1% is formally paid to your SETA through SARS. But the balance is 5.3% of payroll in addition to that 1% that has to be spent on skills development for you to earn those very scarce 25 out of 119 points for the scorecard to be fulfilled and for you to obtain the highest level possible. The notion about skilling is train so that you can absorb the people that you've trained into your business, retrain the people in your business so that they can be promoted to higher levels, and you can hold them accountable for the job that they're doing, and professionalize those people so that the quality of your production cycle in your business is something that you can market to your clients and into their supply chains. So this is how that 6.3% is made up. It's made up of the first 3.5% of the 6.3% of payroll having to be spent on your existing workforce across 7 categories of training and development. 7 categories: on bursaries, on learnerships, on skills programs, on accredited programs, non-accredited programs, on professional body designations, on apprenticeship training, on setting up a training department in your company and counting those costs towards these costs. So that 2.1.1.1 is what the original 3% before 2013, what the original 3% was used for. And that's 3.5% of payroll. The next is what's currently happening at Wits University, really, which is where the government have implemented in the scorecard the obligation of the company to fund fees must fall. So that second one, that 2.1.1.2, is fees must fall. It is funding by using 2.5% of the payroll of your business. It is funding bursaries of students who are registered in higher education institutions. First prize is that they should be your employees who are being funded, or at least future labor pools for your company who are being funded and will be absorbed should they get those qualifications and should they qualify and graduate. 2.1.1.3 is the last 0.3% of the 6.3% of payroll. And that is money that must be spent on disabled people, the training of your disabled workforce, where you use that 0.3% of payroll to make sure that a percentage of your workforce, nothing less than 2% of your workers, are people with disabilities. And you have a budget here to spend. You have to spend 0.3% for as much as 4 points out of those 25 points. So it's not an insignificant amount that you're spending on disabled people. I must emphasize that. And that's how we get to the 6.3% of payroll that has to be spent across the 7 categories of training and development for you to earn those 8 out of 25 points for skills development. It's important to note that I very often get companies that say, a lot of the training we do is from professional bodies or from people who are really experts in their field, but it's not SAQA or ETQA accredited training. That's fine. It doesn't all, some of those, 3 of those categories, of those 7 categories for training and development that you have to spend your money on, can be spent on non-accredited stuff. So for example, continuous professional development training, best practice training that's not accredited. You can have that expenditure recognized. Building your internal training capacity, using your boardrooms for training purposes and putting a cost to that. The electricity, the time of the manager that's taken to do the training. All of that is non-accredited training. And you're entitled to spend a maximum of 25% of that 3.5% of payroll that you have to spend there, that budget. 25% of that budget can be spent on all of those things that are not non-accredited, but are very important for your business and for your company. So that's what we've just been talking about. 25% of that 3.5% can be spent on non-accredited activities. Now, you will also have a target in skills development for learnerships or internships or apprenticeships. It used to be before 2013, the target was 2.5% of headcount for learnerships, 2.5% of headcount for internships. It's now being combined into a target of 5% for either learnerships or internships or apprenticeships or a combination of those. But your target where you earn scorecard points under skills development is to meet a target of 5% of the people who work for you must be on learnerships or internships or apprenticeships for you to earn those additional scorecard points. Any questions about skills development before I go further? Okay, moving on. Sorry, Tara, you raised your hand.
Ivor, there should be somebody else that's joining. It will be registered under my name as well. So there should be somebody that's coming in, if you can let them in shortly as well. Ivor, your microphone is muted. I don't know if you are talking.
Okay, so we are now going to quickly go back to that original slide. Okay, so we've dealt with skills development. We are now dealing with procurement. I do need to say, ladies and gentlemen, that whereas skills development is the largest element in terms of what you have to spend, how much money you have to spend to earn your 25 points, procurement is the scorecard element where you can earn the most points, 45 points. And it's not as expensive as your skills development expenditure. So that's critically important that you do understand that. So in terms of procurement, we're talking about nothing other than your supply chain. In other words, companies you buy your product or your services from. And procurement says 80% of your procurement budget, 80% of your procurement budget, excluding global purchases. In other words, you buy from overseas because it's specified by your customers, excluding what you spend on salaries and overheads for your procurement department, 80% of your procurement budget must be spent on measured entities, and your target is 100% procurement budget recognition. So 80% of the number of companies who are supplying you either a product or a service must be measured entities. They must have a measured status. And 80% of what you spend, how much money you spend, excluding these things over here, but 80% of what's left over of how much money you spent must be recognized for 100% credit, 100% procurement credit. That's what we spoke about earlier. You get additional recognition. You get additional bonus points if the companies you are buying from are Black women-owned businesses, young Black people-owned businesses, male or female, or young or male or female Black disabled-owned and managed and operated businesses that are job creating. So you get more enhanced recognition. And you've got to understand why. The notion of this element is this, that unless a company that traditionally is white-owned and buys from white suppliers, white-owned suppliers, is prepared to encourage put its money where its mouth is and encourage transformation amongst its supplier database. So it's increasingly buying from more and more Black companies, not exclusively, but from more and more Black-owned companies. Nothing is going to change. We are not going to see broad-based Black economic empowerment in this country. So you have a target here to spend 3% of net profit after tax on developing and building Black-owned businesses, Black women-owned businesses, Black young people-owned businesses, Black disabled-owned businesses, to helping them to develop themselves, to grow, and then to contracting with them to buy products or services from them into the future. And you will be rewarded by earning some of those 45 points under the procurement scorecard element. Remembering all the time that under procurement, your objective is to achieve a balance of level 4, 100% procurement credit. So if it's EMEs you're buying from, white-owned businesses that are doing less than 10 million Rand a year would qualify as a level 4. If it's QSEs, then it's at least, they must be measured against the 5 elements and at least be a level 4, and certainly also with generic companies that you might buy from. However, only 25% of the 45 points on offer, only 25% of the 45 points on offer for procurement, only 25% of the 45% of points on offer from procurement are available for a supply chain scorecard measurement. 25 of the 45 points. The other 20 points, in fact, it's 15 points plus bonus, but the other points that are available for enterprise development and supplier development, where you are spending a minimum of an average over the last 5 years of 3% of net profit after tax. So if you're spending 3% of net profit after tax, or an average of the last 5 years of 3% of net profit after tax, the reason, by the way, why it's an average is there could have been some of those years where you weren't declaring a net profit after tax. So it's an average of 5 years of net profit after tax, 3% of that value. On enterprise development, which is the first stage of building a new Black-owned business, and then of supplier development, which is the second stage where you actually give them a contract to buy products or services from them. I like to say normally, if I'm explaining this, do enterprise development in the first year of your relationship and supplier development thereafter. Whereas before 2013, it was you had to spend 1% on enterprise development and 2% on supplier development. It is now easier. You just have to show you're spending 3% of net profit after tax, even if it's all being spent on a supplier development process with new Black-owned suppliers that you're bringing into your supply chain, as opposed to splitting it with enterprise development. One thing I want to warn you about is that the BBBEE Commissioner is spending a lot of time going after illegal and tokenistic enterprise and supplier development. Let me give you a practical example of what I'm saying here. There are enterprise development consultants out there who shall remain nameless, although they have a very long-standing show on one of our DSTV channels. And they say that they're developing enterprises and they're developing suppliers as new businesses, where when you go into it, you find that what they're doing is they're going to Umhlanga Beach. They're speaking to the ice cream seller. They're saying, we'd like to give you a free T-shirt, which says, I am my own employer. This is my business selling ice creams. And they ask that person to sign a document where they're going to give them another 5,000 Rand as a reward for signing the document and wearing the T-shirt. And suddenly they're recognized as a new enterprise. And they're charging the company that is spending the 3% of net profit after tax 150,000 Rand for that privilege. And the BBBEE Commissioner is saying that's absolute fraud. It's not just tokenism, it's absolute fraud. That person should be in red overalls, and maybe they're buying their red overalls from the same companies that they created under the Enterprise Development Scheme. Orange overalls, sorry, not red overalls. So it's stupid business to be putting that 3% into a company that they are not supplying you with suppliers of products or services that you need to use in your supply chain. You're creating a whip for your own back as a business. It's stupid, stupid, stupid. It's ill-considered. And quite frankly, I would really appeal to you, if you're offered a scheme, just come to, and I mean schemes defined in terms of the Tax Act as an illegal program. But if you're offered any kind of scheme, just come to me so we can look at it and I can explain to you what you're being asked to do, because otherwise you're going to get into trouble. Okay, very important before I carry on. Any questions about either procurement, your procurement, or your enterprise and supplier development objectives in terms of the fourth element of broad-based Black economic empowerment?
I've got a question here.
Oh, thank you, Aggie. Yes, sir.
How do we identify these guys, or how do we know they're accredited? If a guy comes in here and he's going to supply, let's say, he's going to take away all your rubbish and he's going to cost you, there's a lot of stuff here and you want to shred a lot of stuff, and he does all this, and he's got a little business that he does this. How do we have to ask him for a BEE certificate? Well,
first of all, you say to him, look, are you a BEE measured entity? And 9 times out of 10, he'll say no. And then you'll say to him, look, I would like to do this. I would like to enter into a contract with you for the next 3 years where you will continue to offer this service to me. And I will give you money to buy a bakkie or to lease a bakkie, or I will register your business and I will cover the cost of the registration of the business. Or I will give you a computer or maybe even just a cell phone so that you can run your business more professionally. And when you're ready, I will give you that 3-year contract. I will enter into that 3-year contract with you. So you divide those activities by saying the first thing is, which is I will help register your business and I'll buy you a cell phone. I might help lease a bakkie for you. You say that's enterprise development. You're helping him to get his business up and running. And then either a couple of months later or a year later, you say, right, now I can give you more money, more funding, maybe more of my time to help you grow your business with other clients. And I will cost my time out as the money value of it that I'm giving to you as supplier development, where my target is to meet 3% of net profit after tax in my business. That's the kind of discussion you would have with him. But that's very definitely. Some companies are saying cleaning, for example. We say to our 5 cleaners, we'll help you create your own business. You'll stop working for us. You'll be your own employers. We'll give you the money we would ordinarily give to a labor broker, which is a lot more than you're earning, so that you can run your cleaning business. And we will give you a contract to do the cleaning for us for the next 10 years. Now, supplier development is what South African breweries did 20 years ago. I remember Joe Teron, who was the HR manager or director at that stage, introduced it 20, 30 years ago at South African breweries, the driver owner scheme, where on the Monday they came to their drivers and said, we're firing you, but come back tomorrow. On the Tuesday, they said, okay, now here is a contract where we're standing as surety for you to own the truck, but come back to us tomorrow. On the Wednesday, they came back, they said, we want you to fire we are now firing the van assistants, but we want you to hire those van assistants, and we will pay you the equivalent of what you need to pay them over and above the contract we've given you for the deliveries and the collections. So by the Wednesday, they had outsourced the driving of their business to their previous drivers, who were now owners of those businesses, who had leased the trucks under the surety from South African Brewery itself, and who had employed the van assistants who were previously employed in the company. So that owner-driver system is a typical kind of supplier development activity that companies can engage in their non-core areas, their non-essentially core areas. Does that answer your question, Aggie?
Yeah, I remember that with SA Breweries. Yeah, I remember that distinctly.
Right. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. Moving on. So the fifth element, the final element against which you are measured for the scorecard of BBBEE, is that of social economic development, where you are required to spend a minimum of 1% of the last 5 years' average of net profit after tax on the development of the communities that your employees live in. In other words, external communities, not internal. So the beneficiaries of this 1% of spend can't directly be the people who work for you. But you can, for example, give a school bursary to an employee and count that as social development. You can, for example, give a university bursary to an employee for their child and count that as social development. You can go along to CHOC, which is childhood cancer, and you can say to them, we're going to give you 1% of our net profit after tax, but we want to know, first of all, that you're going to spend it on only Black beneficiaries. You need to give us that in writing. You need to be registered for that purpose. And more importantly, we want to know that, God forbid, any of the families of any of our employees have a problem with cancer. They will knock on your door and you will prioritize giving them the service that you're giving to everybody else. So in a roundabout way, your 1% of net profit after tax expenditure on social economic development will benefit and can benefit your workforce. But ordinarily, it's spent with social schemes, non-government, non-profit-making organizations that are capable of giving 18A certificates, where those organizations can show that at least 60% of the beneficiaries of the expenditure that organization engages in goes to people who are Black, Indian, colored, or Chinese people who were naturalized before 1994. I had a weird situation where one of the companies that I was measuring and verifying tried to submit proof that they had a bill with a Chinese restaurant where the owner had been naturalized before 1994. And they had documents from the owner of the Chinese restaurant that the money spent in the Chinese restaurant would create job creation amongst fellow Chinese people naturalized before 1994. Basically, they were trying to put off their Chinese restaurant bill against social economic development. Needless to say, it was a very innovative and inventive scheme that they dreamed up, but it was absolutely illegal and it wasn't authorized. Okay. I need to spend a little bit of time on fronting, guys, because fronting is flavor of the month as far as the BBBEE commissioner is concerned. The BBBEE commissioner is saying this: gone are the days when you can give away 26% or 51% or 100% of the ordinary shares of your business that have no value to your gardener or your domestic worker, where they know nothing of the contract. They might have signed something, but they didn't know what they were signing. And where there's no dividend, and maybe even worse, you're counting what you pay that person on a monthly basis as their actual dividend. Gone are those days. You will be wearing orange overalls. Gone are the days where you can have an external shareholder in your business that doesn't attend your shareholder meetings, that never receives a dividend except for maybe a small monthly payment as a prepayment against dividend, but where you're making huge net profits after tax in your business, but that 26% of that money is not flowing to those beneficiaries. Gone are those days. Gone are the days where you enter into an arrangement with a Black female person who is in either of those fronting categories. So what's happening now is that the Department of Trade and Industries has ordered auditors to audit specifically Black female shareholders in businesses who are counting towards the scorecard points on the ownership element, because the assumption is that that's fronting. And then it's for the Black female herself to prove that she's instrumental in the business. She has 26% control in the business. She's employed in the business, or she supplies a service or a product to the business, and is critically important in the production process in that business. But the onus shifts to her. Normally, you're innocent until proven guilty. In this instance, she is guilty until proven innocent, where she can prove the contribution she's making to the company. Any question under fronting? No question under fronting.
No, I'm fine.
All right. Thanks, Aggie. Right. So moving on now. So I spoke earlier about demographics and in the second element, management control and your employment equity process. So the notion is that your company will be measured against the economically active population, the EAP, either for the country as a whole, we call that a national demographic, or alternatively for the province. So you'll see here that this is a chart which was established about 2015. So it's quite an old chart, but a new one hasn't come out yet. In fact, I think a new one came out last year. But this chart shows that overall in South Africa, 40.7% of people are African males and 34.2% are African females, which tells us that on a national basis, 75% of our population are people who are Africans, males and females. Whereas from a colored male perspective, it's a combination of maybe 10.8% of our population are colored. From an Indian perspective, maybe 3% of our population are Indian. And from a white perspective, maybe 11 or 12% of our population are white. So it goes African, it goes white, it goes colored, and then it goes Indian in terms of percentage of population. And how you employ people in your business should measure up to these employment equity, these economically active population profiles. So if you're a national business, in other words, you have a footprint in more than one province, and you want to be measured on a national basis, you will be measured against the overall Republic of South Africa demographic, the first line here, the first row. However, as you can see, those numbers change from province to province to province. So in the Western Cape, the African population is 17 plus 16, which is 27, 30, about 34%, as opposed to 75% on a national basis. 34% as opposed to 75 on a national basis. So if you operate only from Gauteng, you'll be measured against the Gauteng EAP demographic profile. But if you operate around the country, you'll be measured against the overall profile for the country as a whole. And that's how the economically active population demographic spreadsheet works for the country as a whole. Any questions in that regard? Because this is a critical table. It doesn't only allow you to measure who you employ against the profile and see whether you're in keeping with this profile, but it also allows you to measure who your managers are to see that you're in keeping with the profile. You need to know how to use your demographic profile, your economically active population demographic profile in your business when you're seeking to be measured and verified by a SANAS-approved verification agent. Tara, it might be quite useful for us to get the most up-to-date EAP and distribute it to your members around the country as what they measure themselves against.
I'll try and get an updated one.
I'll get it for you. I'll send it to you. I'll send it to you.
Okay, great. So I'll attach, will you put it into the presentation, Ivan?
Yes, we'll put it into the presentation.
Okay.
All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are the issues I now want to deal with. What does black mean? Well, in 2003, when the first scorecard was promulgated, black meant black, ethnically black, Indian, colored, Chinese people naturalized before 1994. But believe it or not, black also meant white, white women. White women were labeled as black because they were previously disadvantaged in this country. They were not sitting at boardroom tables. They did not have shares in businesses, and therefore they were regarded as a disadvantaged. So in leading up to the first scorecard, the negotiation that took place at NEDLAC, the argument was that white women should be included in the definition of black and therefore beneficiaries under the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment Act. And they were. So from 2003 until 2013, when the new scorecard came in, white women were included in the definition of black. From 2013, they were excluded. Why? In other words, the sunset clause on BBBEE kicked in 2013 for white women. The sunset on white women being included under the definition of black, because enough research had been put before NEDLAC, the National Economic Development and Labour Council at that stage, enough research had been put forward to show that between 2003 and 2013, the majority of measured entities were depending on the fact that they had promoted white women to the boardroom. White women were more reflective in their management tiers, and white women were deriving more of the economic benefit of the dividends which are being paid out every year. That the remediation had taken place, and white women were now benefiting, and therefore the sun set on them being included as beneficiaries under the definition of black. Skip to 2017, and again, going back to this demographic here, skip to 2016 actually, at the NASRAC ANC conference, the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal introduces a motion at that conference to say that Indian male and female beneficiaries should be excluded as beneficiaries under the definition of what black means. Because by 2017, there was enough evidence to show that the vast majority of empowerment deals on ownership, on management promotions, on team leader, supervisor, first line, and management promotions in a business had been of Indian male and females, and yet was not happening on the same scale amongst Africans or amongst coloreds. Sorry, within the colored community, the argument was also made by the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal that colored males should also be excluded because particularly within certain spheres of government, but also within certain spheres of the private sector, a disproportionate number of colored males, Indian males, and Indian females had benefited from BBBEE and measured entity status as beneficiaries, and that companies were hiding behind Indian male and female and colored males and not giving the same kind of enrichment priority to African males and African females who constituted 75% of the population of this country. So the definition of what and who is black has gone through a number of significant iterations. In 2013, the sun set on white females being included under the definition of black. Unfortunately, the sun also set at that stage of white male and female disabled people being included under the definition of black, whereas no research had been conducted in that regard. So someone who had it in for white male and female disabled people got them excluded from the definition as beneficiaries, the definition of BBBEE, even though there was no justification. And unfortunately, disabled people do not have a voice in this country. So they just went weak and mildly into the stratosphere, remaining unemployed, and no longer, in fact, even being part of the economically active population of South Africa because they've been marginalized and discriminated against. Any questions about what it means now to be black? So the ANC suggested this at the conference. No decision was made at the conference. There have been a couple of articles, but for political reasons, because of the influence of the Indian male and female lobby on politics in this country, on politicians in this country, on decision makers at NEDLAC, and in fact on Parliament, because of the disproportionate influence of the Indian community, this argument as to whether or not the sun should set on South African Indian male and females and maybe colored males has gone away. It's no longer an argument. There is an attempt to revise it. It is on the NEDLAC table to consider before 2023 by the time the next scorecard comes in. But the political influence of the Indian and the colored male and female communities might be such that it is not taken seriously. It's not implemented. And the problem is, and I'm going to say this again, until there is the sun setting on those communities where there is a disproportionate benefit being derived, And you just need to go to the Beverly Hills and sit there at tea time in the main restaurant area to see those deals being done. You just need to see who's behind Jacob Zuma. You just need to see who's building the oceans in Umhlanga on behalf of Jacob Zuma as his retirement policy to know about that disproportionate influence of the Indian male and Indian female communities and the colored male communities, to understand the argument of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, to know that as long as colored males and Indian females are included as beneficiaries under BBBEE, we are never going to deal with the real problem, which is the problem of African males and African females, who constitute 75% of the unemployment crisis in this country. We're never going to be able to get to the nub of the real problem. By the way, what white women found out after 2013 is that being excluded as a beneficiary doesn't stop you from getting to the boardroom or staying in the boardroom. Doesn't stop you from being a shareholder in the business, because you're still able to make a contribution. So if I'm an Indian male, I shouldn't be worried about the sunsetting on a disproportionate benefit I might derive from BBBEE, because 9 times out of 10, I'm already at the boardroom. I'm not going to lose my job. I'm already making a contribution in the company, so I'm not going to get fired from the company just because I'm Indian. All that's going to happen is specific BBBEE benefit won't be derived from me. So, ladies and gentlemen, you have to understand this argument to understand the principle of what you might see as a debate in the media and the press in terms of how you define what black means. How will black change? Well, I've already explained that to you. Next question, it's a myth, is, 26%. So if I'm gonna have to have a 26% black partner in my business, or if I'm going to give 26% of my ordinary shares to a black trust, employee trust, it means I'm losing 26% of my business. I'm giving that away. Absolutely untrue. Whatever you decide to transfer to the trust, you're entitled to be paid back for. It becomes a standing debt from the trust over a 10-year period to the founders of the business, to the shareholders who are giving that 26% value of the business away to the trust. They're entitled to be paid back. They're entitled to raise a loan account, and the trust is obligated to pay it back over 10 years. And if it doesn't pay it back over 10 years, it will never own those shares. So this thing that I'm giving my business away is absolute rubbish. And the thing that I'm giving control of my business away, when all I'm being asked to do is give 26% of ordinary shares of my business away, is absolute codswallop. It's absolute rubbish. It's the myths which are created by consultants out there, by training providers out there, by lawyers and accountants out there who either don't understand or who are coming up with all of these fanciful schemes to avoid that 26% of transfer of the ordinary shares of your business to the trust or to a black shareholder, and so that they can make money from drawing up those contracts and facilitating those arrangements. So please always understand, you're never being asked to give anything away. You will get additional bonus points if you do give those shares to the beneficiaries and don't charge them for it. But you're not obligated. And the bonus points you get will very often not mean the difference between you being a measured entity and not being a measured entity. Any questions about that? Because I know there's a lot of misunderstanding around that. Okay. Next question is, next issue to deal with is, which elements will become more difficult to manage over time? Well, certainly ownership will become more difficult to manage over time. Ownership is squarely about, are there more and more black people who are coming into, who are in the company or in the environment of the company or in the sole group of the company who deserve to be owners of some of the shares of the business? And so ownership is becoming more and more that element and less of, well, I'll do an equity deal with a black investment firm or with a black supplier or provider who I never see in my business. So ownership is going to become more difficult element to manage. Skills development is increasingly becoming a more difficult element to manage, because very often the majority of companies just don't have enough people to train up on a regular basis that they can release into training to spend the full 6.3% of the expenditure budget on skills development. Procurement is becoming more and more difficult because more and more companies are saying, well, to hell with it. We're not going to be measured. We'll just take our chances. And yet you want to do business with those companies because you like their service or the quality of their product. And I think social economic development is also becoming more and more refined. This, for me, is the most important issue that you're going to need to come to terms with. When transformation hits, it's going to hit. And I'll give you a practical example of what I'm saying. The Black Management Forum for the Built Environment, the Black Management Council for the Built Environment are saying this, that we have enough level 1 and level 2, 51% Black owned and 100% Black owned businesses in the construction sector, that we can say to the Department of Trade and Industry that in certifying companies to be able to be suppliers to local, provincial, national government in any way, we should set the benchmark at level 1 and 2. And from level 3 onwards, those companies should not be certified as suppliers on the Department of Trade and Industry and competitions database. So the Black Business Council for the Built Environment would like the DTI to do that. DTI aren't going to do it. It's a massive chance they would be taking if they tried to do it at this stage, and there would be a massive constitutional court challenge. However, there are some industries where it's actually quite true. Look at media communication. Look at advertising, for example. Look at social media. There are more than enough Black-owned level 1 and level 2 businesses who are offering real service, consistent service, reliable service into the industry for transformation to have hit. You do not, to get a good advert drawn up, to get good placement in a newspaper or a magazine, to get good social media, you no longer need to go to a white supplier to get the quality product that you depend on. There are more than enough Black guys out there. And believe it or not, they employ white people in their companies. So again, I'm going to say, when transformation hits and the realization that an industry has transformed, it will be too late if you're in that industry to do anything then about transforming and becoming a measured entity. And the final issue I want to raise is this. I'm saying to companies more and more, you don't need to be level 1. Become level 4. Do the minimum that's required for you to be truly a good measured entity. Become a level 4. But then use the youth empowerment scheme, the youth employment scheme. Use the youth employment scheme to be able to skip 1 or 2 levels, 1 or 2 BBBEE levels. You can use YES to improve your BBBEE levels after verification. And you can jump by 1 or 2 levels depending on how much of YES you're prepared to use. The youth employment scheme is a fixed term, limited duration contract. There's no expectation of gainful employment. You're paying minimum wages to people who are working and making a contribution in the production cycle in your business. You're employing people who already have the qualifications. They've already got the university or the school qualifications behind them. You're not running a training program. They are working. They are contributing. They're costing you less. It's a 1-year fixed term duration contract of employment. And just in doing it, you're immediately able to jump 1 or 2 levels depending on the targets that you're meeting. You don't have to wait till the end of that year. So if you are verified in March of a year, you implement YES in April. By May, if you were verified in March as a level 4, and you've met double your targets in implementing YES in May, by the end of May, you can have moved from a level 4 to a level 2 immediately. And I'm saying because I've done it for a large number of clients. So I'm not talking out of my hat. I say to associations and organizations like SATMA and Surface Coating Association out there, think of shared services. Think of the opportunity to offer your small members especially, but even your large elements, shared services, create skills development trusts, run management incubators, run enterprise development hubs, run supplier development hubs for your members, for their companies. register empowering suppliers for sectors as enterprise development and supplier development purposes. And facilitate yes for your members in such a way that they don't have to run those programs on their own. And you will be a good association offering shared services to your member companies. Rate your members in terms of how they use your shared services and supply them with accountable credentials. Offer them skills development facilitator activities, employment equity facilitator activities. And that means you're offering them good shared service activities. Baie dankie. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much. That was very informative.